Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is Dr. Huri Amir, Head of Physiology Department, Faisalabad Medical University. Today we are going to learn about red nucleus. Now, what is a red nucleus and how it is serving? The red nucleus serves as an alternate pathway for transmitting the cortical signals to the spinal cord. Now, the red nucleus in the midbrain, or you can say the mesencephalon, functions in close association with that of the corticospinal tract. This small structure is having so much importance that you can say that it is working in close association with that of the motor cortex. It is receiving fibers which are the direct fibers from the primary motor cortex, making the cortico-ruberal tract, then branching fibers from the corticospinal tract. As it is passing through the mesencephalon, it is going to synapse over there at the level of magnocellular portion of red nucleus, and which are the large neurons. Now these large neurons of red nucleus, they are going to give rise to formation of a ruberospinal tract and is going to cross over, or you can say that decussate over there in the lower brain stem, and the course is immediately adjacent and anterior to the corticospinal tract into the lateral columns of the spinal cord. So it is very important to know for all of us that the red nucleus is going side by side, or you can say anterior to the corticospinal tract in the lateral columns of spinal cord, and it is an alternative pathway for transmitting the cortical signals to the spinal cord. Most of the ruberospinal fibers, they do terminate over there in the interneurons of the cord gray matter, along with that of the corticospinal fibers. However, some of the ruberospinal fibers, they do terminate directly on the anterior motor neurons, along with some corticospinal fibers. The red nucleus, they also have close connections with the cerebellum, which is very much similar to connection between the motor cortex and cerebellum. Now this all coordination, this all connection between the red nucleus, motor cortex, cerebellum, this is actually for more accuracy of the movements, more accuracy of the motor functions. You can see the red nucleus, and it is receiving the fibers, or you can say that it has the connections with that of the motor cortex, and they are going to move directly in close contact along with the cortical fibers over there in the spinal tract. Then they are going to receive the fibers from the cerebellum as well, so they are working in coordination. Now, what are the different functions of the cortico-ruberospinal system? The magnocellular portion of the red nucleus has a somatographic representation of all the muscles of the body, like the motor cortex. Stimulation of a single point in this portion is going to lead to contraction of either a single muscle or a muscle group of muscles. The fineness of representation of the different muscles is far less developed than that of the motor cortex. The cortico-ruberospinal pathway is serving as an accessory route, and relatively discrete signals from the motor cortex, they are going to the spinal cord. Now, when the corticospinal fibers, they are destroyed, but still the cortico-rubrospinal pathways are intact, the discrete movements, they can still occur, but the movements for fine control of fingers and hands, they are impaired. So it is very important for all of us to know that for the discrete movements, this cortico-rubrospinal pathway is effective. However, for the fine and exact accurate movements of fingers and hands, intact corticospinal fibers, they are required. The wrist movements, they are still functional unless the cortico-rubrospinal pathway is blocked. So this is very important for all of you to learn that if scenario is given in such a way that they are giving the feeling that there is some sort of infarction over there at the level of corticospinal fibers, but still they are actually seeing the discrete movements of hands, fingers and wrists, then it means that this is occurring because of the intact cortico-rubrospinal pathways. The rubrospinal tract lies in the lateral columns of the spinal cord, along with that of the corticospinal tract. They are going to terminate over there into the interneurons and motor neurons. They control the more distal muscles of the limbs. Corticospinal and rubrospinal tracts, they are together known as the lateral motor system of the cord. So, which is frequently asked in exams, that what is this term, the lateral motor system of the cord. So, all of you should be knowing this term, that what is this red nucleus, what are the functions of red nucleus, then what is this term, lateral motor system of the cord. Now, excitation of the spinal cord motor control areas by the primary motor cortex and red nucleus. The cells of the motor cortex are organized in vertical columns. Thousands of neurons in each column, like in somatosensory and visual cortex, they are organized in vertical columns. Now, each column of cell is functioning as a unit, as a stimulating. They have a function of stimulating a group of synergistic muscle, single muscle. Now, each column has 6 distinct layers of cells throughout nearly all the cerebral cortex. So, the layers of cerebral cortex frequently asked. So, you are going to answer that there is presence of 6 distinct layers of the cells. Now, the pyramidal cells in the 5th layer, the corticospinal fibers. The input signals, all they enter by way of layer number 2 and 4. The 6th layer gives rise to fibers that communicate with other regions of cerebral cortex itself. So, we should be knowing about the function of each column of neurons. The neurons of each column act as an integrative processing system, using information from multiple input sources to determine the output response from the column. So this whole column is going to act as integrative processing system, that one is helping the other to determine the output response from the column. Now, each column can function as an amplifier. They can function as an amplifying system to stimulate the large numbers of pyramidal fibers to the same muscle or to synergistic muscles simultaneously. Now, 50 to 100 pyramidal cells They need to be excited simultaneously or in rapid succession, leading to definitive muscle contraction. So we should be knowing that these corticospinal fibers, they are being produced by the fifth layer in the motor cortex. Then the columns, they are actually functioning in synergism. They are acting in coordination in integrative manner, and they are acting as amplifier system, each column, and 50 to 100 pyramidal cells, they are going to act or excite simultaneously to give rise to a definitive muscle contraction. So if you're being asked about the function of each column of neuron over there in the motor cortex, the dynamic and static signals, they are being transmitted by the pyramidal neurons. A strong signal, initial rapid contraction, then a weaker continuing signal can maintain the contraction for long periods. Each column of cells excites two types of neurons, which are the dynamic neurons and the static neurons. Now you should be knowing about the concept of dynamic neurons and static neurons. Now the dynamic neurons are excited at a high rate for a short period at the beginning of a contraction. That is the initial rapid development of force. Then we have static neurons. They fire at a much slower rate. They continue to fire at slow rate and they are going to maintain the force of contraction. The neurons of red nucleus, they have both the presence of dynamic as well as the static neurons. So there is presence of dynamic as well as static characteristics, except a greater percentage of dynamic neurons is there in the red nucleus, and a greater percentage of static neurons is there in the primary motor cortex. So although there is presence of both these type of neurons, that is dynamic as well as the static neurons, they are there over there in the red nucleus as well as the primary motor cortex, but the predominance of dynamic neurons is there in the red nucleus and the maximum percentage of static neurons is present over there in the primary motor cortex. Now, we should be knowing, when we are learning about the motor system, we should be knowing about the somatosensory feedback to the motor cortex. It helps to control the precision of muscle contraction. The nerve signals from the motor cortex, muscle to contract, somatosensory signals return from the activated regions of the body, neurons in the motor cortex, which are initiating the action. Most of these somatosensory signals, they arise in the muscle spindles, the tendon organs of the muscle tendons, the tactile receptors of the skin overlying the muscles. These somatic signals, often they cause positive feedback enhancement of the muscle contraction. Now you can see how the stimulation of spinal motor neurons is taking place. What is the role of sensory neurons? Then propriospinal tract, how interneurons they are working, how the corticospinal tract that is being produced from